I grew up in Dublin as part of a family of 7. I had 3 older siblings, 3 younger. So I am the middle child, and everybody talks about the middle child syndrome, which maybe I have it, maybe I don't. And went to school locally, left school, went and worked in Allied Irish Banks. And by pure coincidence, I'd gone to school in Dalkey, and I ended up in the bank in Dalkey branch, which I was bitterly disappointed about because I'd spent 13 years between primary and secondary going to Dalkey every day. And I thought when I got the job in the bank, I'd be going to the big city, in other words, into the Dublin city centre to work. So I suppose there wasn't very much change as a child, to be honest with you, in that respect, in that I lived kind of locally to Dalkey, went to school there, I went to work there. It was only a bit later on in life that the changes really came in.
And was it your parents' wish that you'd all go out there and get stable jobs in life and get a good pension, get a good income, buy your own home, pay your mortgage, all have your own families? That kind of consistent career path, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, consistent and I suppose conservative. So I probably within a few weeks of being in the bank, I began to wonder, is this actually the right career for me? So it actually took me 8 years to make the move to get out of it, but I became quite unhappy in the bank. I used to love it in the beginning, and then for various reasons, just things changed. So by that stage, 8 years later, I was working in Wexford town in the southeast of Ireland, a beautiful town, which I still absolutely love. But I just became more and more unhappy in the role. So I bit the bullet and I resigned. And it's funny you asked me about my parents. There was 2 very different reactions. And just as an aside, my parents were separated. They had separated when I was 18. But my father was horrified. It's just like you say, I had this good pensionable job and here I was chucking it all in. And then my mother was saying, good for you, get out there, go see the world. So that was probably the first big change in my life, to leave the bank and go off traveling, which brought me down a completely different career path in the end of the day.
And where did you travel to?
So initially that time, because I did travel twice, that time I went to a kibbutz in Israel with my sister. And so a kibbutz is where you live as part of a commune. You work along there with the other kibbutzniks, they're called, and you do various roles. So one of my jobs would have been in the plastics factory. One of them would have been they had a guest house on the kibbutz, so I was working in the guest house there. But I remember the very first week of being in the kibbutz and just taking flower pots in the plastic factory and putting them into a box. And I remember just being absolutely happy out because I had no stress, no hassle, no worries. So we went to the kibbutz first of all. Then we went from there, we traveled through Egypt for a couple of weeks. Then we went back up to Greece, picked grapes there. Then I went over and picked grapes in France. Then I spent the winter working in a ski resort. So that's a short version of the year.
And how did you find working in a plastics factory? Because I got my own memories of that myself, working in a
Oh, really?
plant where it was extremely hot, especially during the summer months. The heat could be quite overwhelming, because of all these, you had all these polymer plant going along, churning out plastic bags, and it was an extrusion plant, and it was quite warm during the summer months as the extruders, got up to full temperature to produce the plastic bags.
Oh gosh, that sounds horrible. No, it wasn't that hot, to be honest. We would start work at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I remember they had the doors open, and there just always seemed to be, because the kibbutz was beside the sea, so there always seemed to be a breeze blowing. And then we'd finish work at 12. So it was like a 5-hour day with a couple of little breaks along the way as well. So I don't remember the heat working, but yeah, that would be difficult to be stuck inside and being roasted.
Did you return back to Ireland a wiser, more worldly, cosmopolitan person?
Well, obviously, I'd like to think I did, John. Whether I did or not, now you'd have to ask others. But yes, we were away for the year. I came home And then for that year, then I worked in Avis Rent-A-Car, which was great fun. And then I was over and back to Switzerland because I had a boyfriend over there at the time. So probably spent about 2 years working here in Ireland and then working in Switzerland, just waitressing over there in Switzerland. But yeah, I do think that travel definitely, it's not for everybody, but if there's anybody who's an inkling of going, I always just say, go. You can always come back. Okay, you might have got to go looking for a different job, but things will always work out. So yeah, came back then. Wiser, older, and much less like at that stage, a lot of the people that I joined the bank with were still in the bank. They had mortgages, they had car loans, they had furniture loans, and some of them were happy and some of them were not. Those who weren't were they're kind of stuck now because they've got all these loans at a very preferable rate, and some of them felt that they couldn't leave. So, but I've never had that fear of leaving a permanent role because once you've done it once, it's easier to do it.
And after working in Avis car hire for a couple of years and traveling to Switzerland to see your boyfriend, what was next on the agenda for Barbara Moynihan?
Well, I came back to Ireland and then I worked actually I attempted an AIB as well. So they took me back, which was really, really good. I was working in IT and AIB, and then I met my now husband. And after about a year together, we went off to Australia. Then we worked there for a year and came back. And when we came back, I ended up back in the bank again, which was kind of crazy, just because it was handy and the money was good. But I was temping, so there wasn't that same feeling of being stuck in a job. I always knew I could leave, more or less, with a couple of weeks' notice. Yeah.
There was probably no pension because you were a temporary member of staff, so you could come and go as you felt. There was no compulsion on you to have to give a month's notice or 3 months' notice, whatever the case may be. You could give a week or two's notice to say you were off to do something new.
Yeah, exactly. And on the pension, now that I'm getting of a certain older, I'm kind of, the pension would have been nice, but I don't have any regrets about leaving that permanent pensionable job. So yes, I came back to Ireland, working in IT, went to Australia, came back, and then we got married and had my first child. And I decided really it was time. Like at that stage, I was in my 30s. It was kind of time to look for, a real career. So I did a teacher's diploma then in IT. And then I went on to become a Microsoft certified trainer. So training in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all those products.
Of course, yeah. They were completely different to what they are today, of course. And I remember using Lotus 123 way back in the 1980s, of course, in the late 80s. And it was all these macro commands, and it was a green screen, and it was very user unfriendly, I suppose you could say, compared to what you have today. Yeah. So what did you learn about yourself being a Microsoft certified trainer?
I learned that I absolutely loved showing people how to do things. You just get such a kick out of, people are delighted they can actually and like as you were saying there, like Windows, Word, Excel, they were all brand new. Like it was all, so people would be so excited when they could actually get the mouse and move the mouse and make it do what they want, even the simplest of things, and type up something and print it out. So yeah, I just discovered that I really loved just showing people how to do things, teaching. Yeah.
And was that business that you had as a Microsoft certified trainer, was that a sustainable business for you? Did you begin to employ staff as trainers to go out there to client organizations? Did you build a profitable business for yourself?
Not really. So when I did it the first year, I was working for a training company. So it's full-time for a year in a training company. Then they went bust. I hope it was nothing to do with my training skills, but they went under. Then I started to do some freelance or associate work, some people call it. So with different IT training companies. So I'd go in, I'd train, their people. So to be a training company who had other clients, corporate clients. So it wasn't my own business. I was literally going out and doing work for others. Yeah, but then when I had to set my second child, getting on to your point, I suppose, I decided that I would like to work for myself rather than working through these companies.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. And through a throwaway comment that my husband made in a meeting one day, I got a really good role doing a lot of training for a company called Aircell, which later became Vodafone. So that got me started on my own training career in terms of the IT, but it was only ever me. I never made any attempt to grow that business further than myself.
And what made you exit being a Microsoft certified trainer and then move on to a new business model?
So I probably had been a trainer, Microsoft certified trainer, for probably about 6 years. And even though I loved it and every group was different, I was thinking I'd love to train in something a bit different. And again, God, it sounds like actually now that I'm saying it makes me realize a lot revolves around my husband. So he said, well, what would you like to train in? I said, I'd love to train on presentation skills. So he came home from work a couple of weeks later and he said, I've just done the best training program of my life. And I said, what was it on? He said, presentation skills. And I said, will you introduce me to the person? So he introduced me to the person who'd done the program. And that guy was part of the Dale Carnegie Training Ireland team. So very long story short, I ended up doing associate work for them for 9 years. So I was trained on presentation skills and leadership skills. I wasn't training every single day, so I was like a freelancer. So the days that I wasn't doing training with them, it still kept the IT training business going in the background for a number of years. But I stopped it probably in the mid noughties because they kept updating the programs so often. I couldn't keep on top of all the features, and I felt if I'm showing others, I really need to be 110% on top of it. So I let that part of the business go and worked with Dale Carnegie then for 9 years doing the training.
What did you learn about yourself doing Dale Carnegie training?
Wow, I tell you what, I learned an awful lot. Oh my God, actually, funny, you have it here. So one of the programs that I delivered on was, they just called it the Dale Carnegie program, which revolved around these two books, which was How to Win Friends and Influence People, which I always think is a terrible title, but it's really how to get on better with people. You know, it's people skills, I would call it. And then the second part then was how to stop worrying and start living. So as part of the training, you have to read this book at least once, if not twice. So the way it's done is every chapter has a message, and probably reading that book and doing those programs helped me to learn more about myself than in any other part of my life. And I reckon the biggest learning was to try and see things from the other person's point of view, which was eye-opening. Because the other way somebody comes in, they're really narky, and you kind of think they're narky. Then you start to think, well, no, hold on a minute. They might have had a flat tire. They might have had a bad night's sleep. Something might be going wrong in their business or their family or so. So yeah, I learned, that was probably the biggest thing that I learned, but I learned an awful lot.
Yeah, I read the book myself, and what I took away from it, that's how to win friends and influence people, is to call people by their correct name. Because throughout my childhood and early adulthood, I had a bit of a habit of assigning nicknames to people, and in hindsight, that can be hurtful. So I've learned to call people by their correct name. And I think that's been a big improvement in my social skills. Yeah, but I'm also reading another book there at the moment called Social Skills Guidebook by Chris McLeod, and he was talking about the very subject in a recent chapter that I read about empathy. And there's two types of empathy. There's emotional empathy, which we were just talking about there a minute ago, where somebody comes into the room, they're in bad form because of an issue at home or an issue in their business, a personal issue, and you kind of empathize with that person. The second type of empathy is cognitive empathy, where, let's say, for example, I get to know you as a person, I get to know you well, I know what your touch points are, and I can decide then I won't say to Barbara about, X or Y because she doesn't want to bring that conversation up in public, and you avoid it. That's cognitive empathy, Yeah, so there's those. It's a quite interesting book to read.
Interesting, yeah. What's it called again?
It's called Social Skills Guidebook. by Chris MacLeod, Macleod.
Very good.
Yeah. So there you go. But
Yeah.
and what made you decide to move away from being a Dale Carnegie trainer?
Well, here's the thing. I didn't decide. The universe decided. So it was 2009. It was actually, I'll never forget, it was December 2009. And if you remember, Ireland was in recession at the time. So Dale Carnegie is a franchise organization. So the franchise owner said, "Can I meet you for a coffee?" And I said, "Yeah." And I noticed I had been getting very little training with them the previous few months. I kind of, the writing was on the wall, you know. Ireland was in a massive recession. So when I met him in that December, he said, "Look," he said, "I don't have enough work for you." He said, I barely have enough work even for myself. So, so I said, "Okay." And I went home and I said, "Right, people aren't spending money on training. No company is going to be looking for trainers. Obviously, Dale Carnegie didn't need me. So I figured the only way to get a job was to create one myself. And that's why I started training. Later on that year, I called myself On Your Feet. But at the beginning of the year, I was just myself and I started training people on the elevator pitch. And the reason I chose the elevator pitch was nobody else was doing it that I was aware of. And there was a lot of people starting up their own businesses. So there's a lot of need for people to be able to do the elevator pitch. So that's what I started working on that in January. That was the beginning of On Your Feet. A very slow start, I can tell you. But yeah, that was the very beginning.
Yeah, that was a good business idea that you had there, Barbara, because you had loads of people who were unemployed. Unemployment was going to the roof. People were going to network meetings to get out of the house, I suppose you could say. And people were in this situation where they felt very vulnerable. They were going into a big, network room where there's loads of people. And all of a sudden they were asked to do that 60-second elevator pitch. And they felt really out of their comfort zone, trying to talk about, who their ideal client is, what value they provide, how they provide that value. So there was a great insight there from your perspective to provide that training to people. Well done to you.
Yeah. There was, but John, to say to you one thing, the people who needed what I had, like you said, were just starting up their business, they were unemployed, they didn't have any money. So every networking event that I went to, people said, "That's a great idea, brilliant," but they didn't have the money to pay for it. So I ended up getting funding, doing it through the New Frontiers program. So basically government funded programs would bring me in to train others and the local enterprise offices and that. So yeah, anyway, I cut across you. Apologies.
Hey, you're okay. That's fine. It's been a very interactive conversation to date so far. So once the economy started to pick up, then how did you bring your business to the next level?
So for the first probably 2 years, it was just me. And it was like it just takes ages to get your name out there and to get people to know who you are. Even though I had 9 years of experience, that was all under the name of Dale Carnegie. So nobody knew Barbara Moynihan. Nobody knew On Your Feet. So I networked like a nutter. Like I literally networked 3 times a week, every week for the first 18 months. So things started to pick up then. I started to get the corporate work. First thing I did was I got somebody to do my admin. And she's still with me now. She does 20 hours a week. But it was just myself probably for the first 2 or 3 years. Then I won a business award. And one of the questions was, how are you going to grow the business? And I was thinking, well, I'm already working nearly 6 days a week. Like there's no way I can do any more. And that's where the idea of taking on another trainer came from. So I probably took on my first associate trainer in 2014. And then 2 years later, I took on another one. So and I trained them up then in our methodology. And the idea then is that if I would do less training myself. So I could do more business development and then they would do more of the training. So that's basically how it grew, slowly, very slowly and very lean. So I don't have I'm the only full-time employee of the company. Anybody else, so Sharon, who does all the operational and admin, she's on a monthly, through her own company, she's on a monthly figure. Then I have the associates get paid by the day. So when I was training up my associates, I didn't pay them because they were getting the knowledge, but as soon as they were up and running, then they're obviously on a daily rate. So I'm only paying for people as I need them. And the same thing with Debbie, who does all the financial end of things. I pay her on an hourly basis every month. So it works, you know, it's we're not huge, but we're profitable.
That's a good business model you have there. And what you did, you took a step back from being involved too much in the trenches, and you got yourself out there and you took the more strategic role, and you decided, I'm going to focus on developing this business. And you got people working around you to do the more day-to-day admin work, the finance work, and you got some associate trainers, as you said, to go out there and deliver programs to current clients. That gave you the opportunity to be much more strategic and look to develop the business and look for new ventures within your business. So aside from the elevator training, what type of training do you provide now today in addition?
Yeah, so we stopped doing the elevator training probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and just focus on presentation and communication skills. Only spoken. So we don't do any of the writing skills. So it's typically 1 and 2 day high impact presentations programs, or communicating with impact virtually. So still probably maybe 85% of our work is still virtual, believe it or not. I think companies are a bit reluctant to bring people, you know, to get them all into the office or to get them to travel to a venue when people are so used to working at home. Plus as well, a lot of presenting is still taking place virtually. So it's mainly in company programs. Probably about 10% of our work could be one-to-one with people, corporate clients, and maybe 5% from our open programs. So that's a very small part of the business.
A very interesting comment you're making there about the virtual world, because another person from the PSA, Susan Heaton-Wright, she still does quite a lot of her work virtually as against in person, as you just mentioned a few minutes ago. But there are a lot of people in the PSA who would say that in person is the big thing to be in, and forget about virtual world. So there's a bit of a conflict there between different personalities, without mentioning names, of course. But
look, each to their own. It's whatever works for your clients. Actually, whatever you know, I might say, oh, I love the in person. If my clients don't want it, then okay, I can love it. But am I looking after my clients or looking after myself? And to be honest with you, I have to say, as an extrovert, I thought, you know, once COVID was over, I'd be dying to get back in the room. And I'm not. Like, I find even talking to you here now, yeah, it's not the same being in the room, but I still get the same buzz. And I think there are some people who really struggle with the virtual world because they have that need to be physically in the room with others. So, but look, at the end of the day, as I said, each to their own.
Yeah. You've had a very varied life, Barbara, you know, between working in the bank as a permanent employee, part-time employee. You were a Dale Carnegie associate. You've traveled the world. You've had your own business for a number of years in different guises. What's been the biggest lesson you've learned over the years in your professional career and personal life in terms of change and handling change?
For me, I think once you make one big change, it's easier then to make other changes. So for somebody who's been maybe in a permanent role for many years and it suits them really well, and then if you know the company is bought or they're let go, I think has a massive impact on them. But no, I find change relatively easy because I had a big change early on in life. That's what I've learned about myself, personally and professionally. I'm okay with change, so long as it's for the positive, which it mostly is. Yeah.
What you're saying there, Barbara, effectively is that your self-esteem has never been impacted by change in a negative way. You've always seen the good in change, and you have a high level of self-assurance. So like if you just take your current business model, where you were doing the elevator pitches, you took a more strategic role on, and then you got that business and you developed it further. You got bigger and better clients. You got new revenue streams going. Now you're concentrating on the whole area of presentation skills. So yeah, you've always been a person who's gone out there and sought change and never feared it. And that's a great way to look at life, to be quite honest, because I do think that a lot of people fear change because of the uncertainty it brings.
Yeah. But the other thing I would say to you as well, John, I have always, probably from 1 year into the business, whether I actually did a contra with somebody, I've always had a coach. I've always had somebody that I can bounce things off. It's much easier to make a change if you're talking it through with somebody. You know, in the early days, it would have been my husband, but then with a coach, you're bouncing things off them. It's much easier than make the decision by yourself.
True. I know what you're saying there, yeah. Or in a lot of cases, people put off making decisions because just fear that uncertainty, and they stay stuck in their comfort zone. They cannot leave that comfort zone. What you're saying there, I think it's invaluable to have a coach, no matter how experienced you are in business, because we all face, I suppose, a little bit of uncertainty, or we need that bit of security or a second person to, give us that bit of positive thinking to our ideas that it can be done.
Yeah, exactly. Positive thinking, or sometimes a check in with reality. Well, hold on a minute. Is that really a good idea? I'll give you the example. The elevator pitch programs, I was running them, and my husband kept saying, "Gee, because you're running around and you don't seem to be bringing in much. It seems to be dragging you down." Anyway, I got a mentor actually, as opposed to a coach, and the mentor said to me, "What are you doing running those programs? They're not profitable." And I stopped. So often you listen to somebody like that who's a coach or a mentor who's outside of your circle. So they can definitely give you the encouragement, but they can also be very honest and tell you things you need to hear, or make you aware of things you need to hear.
Yeah. I think they hold you accountable is what you're effectively saying there, Barbara. I do think that one of the big issues for, say, self-employed or lone entrepreneurs, whatever term you want to use, is they get an idea in their head and they think, this is going to earn me a lot of money. But, when the coach or mentor says to them, hang on a second here, do you think people would see value in that service offering? Oh, no, they won't.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you're saying. I see it quite often.
Yeah. I think also what's important in life is, if you have a coach or mentor, is to get started doing something. And if you can build your skill set and take it forward and go on to more and bigger projects over time, or get something out there in the first instance that you can talk about, and that gets you interest in people, and they get interested in you also. That's a good point that you're making there. It's been a very interesting conversation today, Barbara. So thank you very much for your time. And
Thanks.
what I have gained from today's conversation is travel. Never be afraid to get out of the home and travel the world and come back home with a different and better, more cosmopolitan perspective of life. And I certainly did that many years ago when I went to London in the 80s. Also, I think what Barbara did today was she talked about the fact that she found her mojo in showing people how to do things. So don't be afraid to try and find what your purpose is in life. That's really crucial to establishing any successful business. And you also talked about there, the universe decided that you are no longer going to be a Dale Carnegie trainer. And sometimes we have to accept, customer feedback that there's no future in the business for us. But what Barbara did was she got off her feet and she went out there and started a new business. She wasn't going to be affected by poor news or negative news. She had that level of self-confidence to get up and get going again. That's really important in business, to have bottle. So is there anything else you'd like to say before I let you go, Barbara?
Just if there is anybody listening there, just to reiterate what you said there, John, if you feel like traveling, go for it. What's the worst that can happen? You come back, that's fine. I've known people who've done that, and that's grand. You just go back, you look for another job, and you get on with your life, but at least you've tried it. And that's the thing.
Of course. And if you don't try something, you don't know how far you're going to go. And as Dave Heiner says, go Rhino.
There you go.
Yeah. So on that note, Barbara, I'll bring today's conversation to a close. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a million, John.